The planet had no name, only a number. Orth 9. It sat at the far edge of a mapped sector where nothing interesting had ever happened and nothing interesting was ever expected to happen. The survey drone had flagged it 6 months ago with a single low-priority note: possible geometric stonework detected underground. That was all. Sorrel had seen 100 flags like that one. Most of them turn out to be natural rock formations. Crystals growing in straight lines, cliffs that cracked clean, mineral deposits that fooled a scanner into thinking something intelligent had been at work. She had learned not to get excited. 30 years of xenoarchaeology had trained that habit out of her completely. Still was work, and work was work. She led the surface team down the ramp of the Pale Meridian and onto the gray-brown ground of Orth 9. The wind came in low and cold, moving across a flat landscape with nothing to stop it. Behind her, Bram lumbered down with the equipment case, his 4 thick legs pressing deep prints into the soft soil. He was Ulvin, built like a boulder with eyes, and he said very little. That was why Sorrel liked working with him. Skin looks stable, he said, reading his handheld. Stone formation is about 40 meters down. Access point is north, 12 minutes walking. Then we walk, Sorrel said. They walked. The access point turned out to be a natural sinkhole that had opened up sometime in the last century, exposing the top of what looked like a stone ceiling. Something, had built underground. Sorrel crouched at the edge and looked down into the dark. The air coming up from below was dry and still. Old air. The kind of air that had not moved in a very long time. They rigged lights and descended. What they found below was not a small chamber or a single wall. It was a city, or would have been one. The ceilings were high and arched, the walls carved with precision, the streets, if they could be called streets, laid out in a pattern that suggested careful thought rather than gradual growth. Sorrel moved slowly, scanning everything, saying nothing. Bram walked behind her with the wider equipment case open, recording automatically. "This is big," Bram said. "Yes," Sorrel agreed. "There is nothing in the catalog that looks like this." "No, there is not." She stopped at a wall and studied the carvings. They were detailed, not decorative, she thought. Too organized for decoration. This was language, writing of some kind. She photographed it and moved on. There would be time to study it properly. Right now, she wanted to understand the shape of the place. They moved deeper. The city went on further than their lights could reach, spreading out in all directions below the surface of Orth 9 like something that had been hidden on purpose. Not buried by time, hidden by choice. Then Bram's motion sensor made a sound. It was a small sound. A soft beep. The kind that meant something small was moving, not far ahead. Sorrel stopped walking. She put her hand out to stop Bram, too. They both stood still. The sensor beeped again. Steady movement. Calm. Slow. Animal, Bram said quietly. There were no life signs on the surface scan, Sorrel said. That does not answer my question. She moved forward carefully, light raised. The corridor turned. She turned with it. And there, in the center of a wide chamber with walls carved floor to ceiling and symbols, sitting cross-legged on the stone floor in the middle of a faint ring of dust that looked like it had been undisturbed for a very long time, was a child, a human child. The child looked up at them without jumping, without screaming, without any sign of fear at all. He was a boy, perhaps 10 or 12 years old, with dark hair and calm, dark eyes. He was holding something in both hands, a small object carved from pale stone. He looked at Sorrel and then at Bram with the kind of patient expression that belonged on someone much older. Then he said, in clear and simple galactic standard, "You took a long time." Sorrel did not move for several seconds. She was not a person who froze easily. But she froze now. Bram was already running a bioscan. He read the result quietly. Human. Male. Appears to be in good health. No signs of injury or illness. No signs of starvation. He paused. No signs of fear. Sorrel crouched down slowly, so she was at the boy's level. "What is your name?" she asked. "Doran," the boy said. "How did you get here, Doran?" He thought about the question for a moment, not as if he did not know the answer, as if he was deciding how much of it to give. "I have always been here," he said finally. Sorrel looked at the carved stone in his hands. Then she looked at the wall behind him. In the center of the largest carved panel, surrounded by thousands of symbols, was one single mark that stood apart from the rest, slightly larger, slightly deeper cut into the stone than everything around it. It was the exact same symbol as the one on the stone the boy was holding. She looked back at Doran. He was watching her notice it. He did not look surprised that she had. He looked like someone who had been waiting a long time for exactly this moment, and was very, very glad it had finally come. The stone was old in a way that made Sorrel uncomfortable. Not old the way ruins were usually old, worn down by wind, stained by water, cracked by time. This stone was old the way a stop clock was old. Everything was where it had been left. Nothing had fallen. Nothing had eroded into ruin. The city beneath Orith, 9 looked less like something that had survived and more like something that had been paused. She set Doran up in a comfortable space near the ship's small common room. He sat on the bench seat without complaint and ate the food she gave him slowly and without rush. He looked at everything, the walls, the equipment, the other crew members who passed through and stared at him. He did not seem bothered by the staring. He seemed mildly interested in it, Doctor. Ivan arrived from the research bay, rubbing her small 6-fingered hands together the way she always did when she was too excited to keep still. She was Seth, compact, quick-eyed, with a mind that found patterns and things the way other people found loose change in their pockets. Constantly and without effort. The language on the walls, she said to Sorrel without greeting her first. I've been running it through every database we have. Every dead language. Every partial catalog. Every fragment. And I have found something. Found what? It does not match anything, but it echoes everything. Ivan spread her notes on the table. There are 3 dead languages from completely separate sectors of the galaxy that each share a small number of root structures with what is written on those walls. Not copies, not related dialects. Faint echoes, as if those 3 languages each grew from something older. She tapped the notes. This is that something older. Sorrel looked at the photographs of the carvings spread across the table. She had spent 30 years looking at dead civilizations. She had never felt this feeling before, the feeling of standing at the beginning of something rather than the end. Bram came in from the equipment bay with a scanner in one hand and a look on his face that Sorrel had never seen on him before. Bram was not a person who looked unsettled. He looked unsettled now. I have the dating results, he said. Good, said Sorrel. They are not good, said Bram. He set the scanner on the table. The mineral dating on the lower sections of the structure puts them at over 400,000 years old. Nobody spoke. That predates every spacefaring civilization currently in the galactic record. Ivan said slowly. Yes, said Bram. That predates most civilization records entirely. Yes, said Bram again. I ran it 3 times. Sorrel sat down. She looked across the common room at Doran, who was eating a piece of dried fruit and watching them talk with those calm, patient eyes of his. She got up and walked over to him. Doran, she said, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me as clearly as you can. Do you understand? Yes, he said. Where did you come from? Not where you were sitting when we found you. Before that, where did you come from, and how did you get to that planet? He was quiet for a moment, not afraid of the question, thinking about it properly. I did not remember arriving, he said. Why try to think back to arriving? There is nothing there. But I remember the city. I remember what it looked like when it was not a ruin. He looked down at the carved stone in his hand. I remember the people who lived there, their faces, the sounds they made, the way the gardens smelled in the warm season. Sorrel kept her voice very even. Doran, that city is 400,000 years old. I know, he said. He said it the way someone said I know when they had known for a very long time and had simply been waiting for someone else to catch up. Ivan appeared at Sorrel's shoulder. Her voice was quiet. I found the symbol, the one on his stone. It appears throughout the ruins, but it concentrates near the center of the city, near what I think is the civic heart of the structure. She hesitated. It appears to be a title, not a name. I have a translation. What does it mean? Sorrel asked. Ivan looked at the boy, then back at Sorrel. She lowered her voice even further, though in the small room it made little difference. The one who stays, she said. Doran did not react to those words. He had not been meant to hear them, but Sorrel watched his face carefully and she saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not surprise, not discomfort. Something much quieter. Recognition. He finished his fruit and folded his hands in his lap and looked out the viewport at the gray sky of Orith 9 with an expression that Sorrel could not name. It was not sad. It was not lonely. It was something in between those things and something else entirely. The expression of a person who had held something carefully for a very long time and was beginning to feel the weight of its shift. She did not ask him anything more that night. She sat across from him in silence. The ship hummed around them. Outside, the wind moved across the empty planet, and somewhere below them, the city waited in the dark, exactly as it had waited for 400,000 years. The ruins did not feel empty anymore. Sorrel had worked in dead cities before. There was a particular kind of silence that lived in them, a heavy, finished silence like the last page of a book. She knew that silence well. She had spent her career inside it. This was different. Walking back into the underground city with Doran beside her, the silence felt less like an ending and more like a held breath, like something waiting to be spoken. Doran walked without hesitation. That was the first thing she noticed. The corridors of the ancient city were dark beyond the reach of their lights, and the floor was uneven in places, cracked and raised by centuries of subtle geological pressure. Sorrel watched where she stepped. Bram watched where he stepped. Ivan watched everything at once and still nearly tripped twice. Doran never looked at the floor. He moved through the dark corridors the way a person moved through their own home at night, not by sight, but by knowledge. He turned before the corridor turned. He stepped over rises in the floor before the light reached them. He slowed before they reached chambers and stood at the threshold for a moment, as if greeting each room quietly before entering. Sorrel said nothing about it. She watched. They reached the library. It was a long hall, wider than the others, with shelves carved directly into the walls. The shelves held stone tablets, hundreds of them, standing upright in rows. Ivan made a sound that was not quite a word and went to them immediately, pulling out her scanner with shaking hands. "These are intact," she breathed. "All of them. 400,000 years, and not one is cracked. The preservation in this section must be deliberate," Bram said, scanning the walls. "Temperature, humidity, everything is controlled. Something is still maintaining this environment actively." "What is maintaining it?" Sorrel asked. Bram looked at his scanner, then at the walls, then at his scanner again. "I cannot find a power source." Doran walked slowly along the library wall. He moved his fingers across the inscriptions lightly, the way a person touched something familiar and beloved. He stopped partway down the hall and stood quietly before one particular section of tablets. "This one is about the garden," he said. They were very proud of the garden. It took 3 generations to grow properly, but when it did, it fed the whole city and still had enough left to give to travelers. Ivan looked up sharply from her scanner. She checked the section Doran was standing before. Her face changed. "He is correct," she said quietly to Sorrel. "This section does reference agriculture, large-scale communal farming." She kept her voice steady with visible effort. "He should not be able to read this language. No living person can read this language." Bram looked at the boy. "How do you know that?" he asked. Direct, as Ulven always were. No softening. Doran turned to look at him. His expression was patient, honest. "Because I helped plant it," he said. The library was very quiet after that. Sorrel let the silence sit for a moment. Then she moved them forward. There was more to see, and standing still with the weight of what the boy had just said felt like something that could crack her open if she gave it too much room. And could see the end of the library hall. They found a door she had not noticed on the first visit. It had been covered by a thin fall of dust that must have shifted when they had disturbed the air the day before. The door was plain compared to everything else. No carvings, no markings. Just smooth stone, fitted so precisely into the wall that the seam was barely visible. Doran stepped forward and pressed his palm flat against it. The door did not swing or slide. The stone simply softened, changed, and then was not there. Sorrel had no better way to describe it than that. The stone was present, and then it was not, and the passage beyond it was open. None of them spoke. Beyond the door was the preservation chamber. The air inside was warm and faintly sweet, not stale, not recycled. Alive somehow, in the way greenhouse air was alive. The walls of the chamber were covered floor to ceiling in a single unbroken mural, painted in colors that had not faded even slightly in 400,000 years. The mural showed figures. Dozens of different species, some recognizable, some not, standing in a wide circle. Their postures were open, welcoming. Between them were objects that looked like tools, food, star charts, instruments. Gifts, Sorrel realized. They were giving each other gifts. And at the very center of the circle, painted with care and detail that was clearly deliberate, clearly loving, was a human child. Sorrel stood in front of it for a long time. She heard Bram contact the ship from behind her, his voice low. She heard him report the find to Galactic Command, as was required by survey protocol. She heard the acknowledgement come back. And then, a few minutes later, she heard the second message, the one that came back in a different tone. Harder, more official. A retrieval team was being dispatched. The boy was to be secured. Command wanted him transferred. Sorrel looked at the mural. She looked at the human child painted at the center of every species the Tenders had ever known, given the place of honor, the center of the circle. Then she looked at Doran, who was standing beside her looking at his own painted face on the wall, with an expression that was tired and old, and, underneath all of it, quietly sad. They painted you, Sorrel said softly. They loved me, Doran said simply. And I love them. Outside, across the empty surface of Orith 9, the wind moved and said nothing. Ivan did not sleep. She worked through the night with the library photographs spread across every surface of the research bay, cross-referencing fragments, building translation bridges from the 3 echo languages she had identified, testing each result against the others. By the time the ship's interior lights shifted to morning cycle, she had enough. She called everyone to the common room. Even Doran came and sat at the end of the table, folding his hands and waiting quietly. Ivan stood at the head of the table with her notes in both hands and the particular expression she wore when she had discovered something that rearranged her understanding of everything. Sorrel had seen that expression on her twice before in 15 years. Both times had been significant. This civilization, Ivan began, is not a lost civilization in the way we normally use that term. A lost civilization implies something that fell, or ended, or was destroyed and forgotten. That is not what this is. She set her notes down. This is the civilization, the first one, in this entire region of the galaxy, before any species we have on record developed writing or agriculture or star travel. These people were already here, already spacefaring, already teaching. Nobody interrupted. Every major civilization's earliest records contain the same anomalies. Agricultural techniques that appear fully formed with no developmental history behind them. Mathematical concepts that arrive in the record without any visible process of discovery. Early star charts that are far too accurate for the instruments that supposedly created them. Ivan pressed her hands flat on the table. Archaeologists have argued about these anomalies for centuries. The answer is in this library. The answer has always been in this library. She looked around the table. They visited. Every developing civilization in this region of the galaxy received a visit at some point in their early history from these people. They did not conquer. They did not rule. They gave tools and knowledge, and then they left and let each species grow on their own. They called it, in their own language, something that roughly translates to tending. That is why they called themselves the Tenders, Bram said. Yes, Sorrel spoke. What happened to them? If they were this advanced, this widespread, where did they go? Why is there only one site? Ivan was quiet for a moment. She picked up one specific set of photographs from the table, the final tablets from the deepest section of the library. They chose to stop, she said. The later tablets describe a decision made by the whole civilization together. They believed that their continued presence was beginning to shape the development of younger species too much, that they were becoming a crutch, a ceiling. They decided that the best thing they could do for everyone they had ever cared for was to remove themselves. She paused. They called it the long stepping back. The room was very still. They did not die. Ivan continued. They ended their civilization deliberately and completely, dispersed, became part of other worlds and other peoples in ways the tablets do not specify. All of them. She stopped again. All of them except one. Sorrel turned to look at Doran. He was looking at the table. His face was calm, but there was something behind it, a deep and private kind of weight that he was holding very still so it would not show too much. One stayed, Ivan said. The tablets describe it as a volunteer, someone who chose to remain, not to interfere, not to guide, but to remember, to be a living record, to be there when someone finally came looking, so the tenders would not be entirely gone from the world. She set the photographs down. The carved stone was the marker, the symbol of the one who stayed. The title, The One Who Stays, Bram said quietly. Doran said nothing. He turned the carved stone slowly in his hands, the way he always did when the conversation came close to something real. Sorrel watched him. She thought about 400,000 years. She tried to hold the number in her mind and could not do it. It was too large. It slipped through like water. The communication panel on the wall chimed. The tone was Galactic Command. Sorrel answered it. The officer on the other end spoke in the smooth, practiced language of official authority. The retrieval team was 12 hours out. The boy was to be held securely. Upon transfer, he would be placed under study protocol. His apparent knowledge of the ruins made him a significant research asset. The Command Research Division was very interested in what could be learned from extended examination. Sorrel kept her expression steady. Under what specific law is this transfer authorized? The answer was long and vague and full of words that moved around the question rather than answering it. She cut the communication. Bram looked at her. Ivan looked at her. Both of them were waiting. We are not handing him over, Sorrel said. She said it simply, without drama. The way she might say the scan results are wrong when she was certain. It was not a decision she had agonized over. It had arrived in her fully formed the moment she had heard the words research asset used in relation to a child who had spent 400,000 years keeping a promise. Doran looked up at her. Something in his face shifted, something very small and very old, like a door opening just slightly in a room that had been shut for a long time. The last time someone came to take me somewhere I had not agreed to go, he said, quietly and without any particular heat. It did not go well for them. He said it as a statement of fact, the way someone described weather. Sorrel nodded once. Good, she said. Then we are in agreement. The retrieval ship came out of faster-than-light travel like a blade being set down on a table. No urgency, no drama, just the clean, deliberate arrival of something that did not expect to be challenged at IT was big. 3 times the mass of the Pale Meridian, with the flat, angular shape of a command enforcement vessel. The kind of ship that did not usually get sent for a single child on an empty planet. The kind of ship that got sent when someone in a high place had decided the situation was not a request anymore. The IT hailed them immediately. Sorrel answered from the bridge, with Bram the navigation console, and Ivan at the far wall pretending to run calculations and actually watching every word of the exchange. The commander of the retrieval ship had the voice of someone who had given orders for so long that being refused one was genuinely hard for him to process. He was polite in the way that power was sometimes polite, the kind of polite that was really just forced dressed in a clean uniform. The boy was to be transferred. The Pale Meridian was to hold position. Any failure to comply would be treated as obstruction of a command directive and dealt with accordingly. No, Sorrel said. The commander's politeness did not disappear. It just became thinner. He explained the authority under which he was operating. He explained the consequences of noncompliance. He explained, carefully and at some length, that the Pale Meridian was a small survey vessel with no armament and no grounds to refuse a direct command order. Sorrel let him finish. Then she said, under Xenocultural Preservation Code, Article 7, any being that can be demonstrated as a living continuation of a protected historic civilization cannot be removed, confined, or subjected to study without that being's consent. I am formally invoking that protection on behalf of this individual. There was a pause on the channel. That article applies to archaeological artifacts, the commander said. It applies to living cultural continuations, Sorrel said. The article does not specify non-sentient artifacts. It specifies protected cultural continuations. This individual is the last living member of the oldest civilization in this region of recorded galactic history. The law covers him. Another pause. Longer this time. We will settle this interpretation at a command tribunal, the commander said. In the meantime, you will comply. The channel was still open. The retrieval ship held its position, massive and close and very sure of itself. Then Doran walked onto the bridge. He had been in the common room. Nobody had called him. He had simply come, with the carved stone in his hand, and stood at Sorrel's shoulder and looked at the view screen where the retrieval ship filled most of the frame. He said, "May I speak to them?" Sorrel looked at him for a moment. He met her eyes with that quiet steadiness of his, the steadiness that had nothing aggressive in it, nothing frightened. Just clarity. Old, clean clarity. "Yes," she said. She opened the channel fully. Doran looked at the view screen. He stood straight. "My name is Doran," he said. His voice was a child's voice, clear and simple. "I have been on this planet for longer than your civilization has existed. I did not stay here by accident. I did not stay here because I was lost. I stayed because I chose to, so that when someone came looking, they would find something real." He paused. "The people I lived with did not believe in ownership. They believed in tending. They gave every species they encountered tools and knowledge and respect. And then they stepped back and let those species become what they were going to become. They never once took." The channel was open. The commander said nothing. "I'm not an asset," Doran said. "I'm not a specimen. I am a memory that chose to remain alive." His voice did not rise. It did not shake. It held the same, even quiet it always held, except underneath it now there was something immense, something so old and so settled that it pressed against the words without breaking them. "I have watched civilizations begin and watched them end. I have watched species make the choice between taking and tending so many times that I have stopped being surprised by it. But I have also never stopped hoping." He looked directly at the screen. "This is the moment you choose what kind of civilization you're going to be. Not today as a whole. Not your history. Right now, this decision, this moment. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm telling you clearly what the cost of staying is." The channel stayed open for a long time. Sorrel did not move. Ivan had stopped pretending to work. Bram stood with his arms at his sides and his eyes fixed on the boy with an expression that Sorrel had never seen on an Ulvan face before. The commander's voice came back. It was slower than before. Something in it had changed, not gone soft exactly, but shifted, moved by a fraction. "What are you?" he asked. "I'm what your oldest stories call the helper," Doran said. "The one who stayed when all the others stepped back. I stayed so that when you finally came looking, you would know that someone had been here who cared about you before you even existed." The channel stayed open for another long moment. Then, the retrieval ship's engines changed pitch. Sorrel watched the scanner. The ship was moving, not toward them. Away. Pulling back. Not fleeing. Withdrawing. There was a difference, and she felt it. The channel closed. Sorrel let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Beside her, Doran lowered his hand with the carved stone in it and stood very still. From behind her, she heard sound. She turned. Bram was standing at his console with his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. His broad face was doing something unusual. He was crying. Quietly, without drama. The way someone cried when something reached them in a place they did not normally let things reach. He did not explain it. He did not need to. Sorrel looked at Doran. The boy looked out the viewport at the place where the retrieval ship had been, and his expression was not victory. It was not relief. It was the expression of someone who had made this same case in various forms more times than he could count, and was glad once again that it had worked and tired underneath the gladness in a way that was very deep. The next morning, Doran asked to go back down, not to investigate, not to catalog or scan or record. He simply said, quietly, over the morning meal, that he wanted to walk through the city one more time before they left. Sorrel said yes without hesitation. She did not ask why. She understood why. They went down together, Sorrel, Bram, Ivan, and Doran. No equipment cases this time. No scanners running. They brought lights and nothing else, and they walked through the underground city of the Tenders the way people walked through a place they were saying goodbye to. Duran led them. He took them places they had not found on their own. A small side room tucked behind the library, easy to miss, where the walls were covered not in formal inscriptions, but in drawings. Rough, personal, the kind made by hands that were recording something precious rather than official. Animals that no longer existed. Plants with no names in any current catalog. Faces. Their young made these, Doran said. He stood in the center of the room and turned slowly, looking at each drawing in turn. They were encouraged to draw what they loved. The city kept all of them. Ivan photographed everything, silently and carefully. They passed through the civic halls, through what had been a gathering space large enough for thousands, through a corridor where every ceiling stone had been carved with a different pattern. Each one unique, Doran explained, representing a specific family line. A record of belonging. Every person who had ever lived in this city had a pattern above their head that said, "I was here and I was known." Bram looked up at the ceiling for a long time without speaking. The last room Doran brought them to was small and plain at the very end of a short corridor that branched off the preservation chamber. The room was different from everything else in the city. Where the rest of the city was grand, built to last, built to impress time itself. This room was intimate. Low ceiling, smooth walls, and covering every surface from floor to the top of the wall, covering every inch of available stone, were handprints, hundreds of them, thousands, pressed into the stone when it had been soft, preserved when it had hardened, left by every member of the civilization that had ever lived here. Small ones and large ones. Hands with many fingers and hands with few. Every shape and every size. Ivan stood in the doorway and did not go in for a moment. She was breathing slowly, the way she breathed when something was hitting her harder than she wanted it to. Duran walked to the far wall. He moved along it with his eyes, searching until he found what he was looking for. He stopped, he lifted his hand and pressed his palm flat against the wall. Sorrel watched. She saw, clearly, unmistakably, that his hand was settling into an impression that was already there, worn by 400,000 years of being pressed and being visited and being touched. His handprint, already in the stone, already home. He held it there for a moment with his eyes closed. Then he lowered his hand and turned back to them. Sorrel asked, "What happens now?" She meant it simply, not philosophically. What would he do? Where would he go? "I will come with you for a while," Doran said. "There are other places." The Tenders left records on other worlds too, deeper records, fuller ones, for when the civilizations that found them were ready to understand. I have been waiting for someone patient enough to carry the work forward. He paused. The survey work you do, the careful kind, where you go slowly and you do not take things, you only look and record to try to understand. That is the right kind. Ivan made a small sound. It might have been a laugh. It might have been something else. "There is one thing I want to tell you," Doran said. He looked at each of them in turn, at Ivan, at Bram, Sorrel last and longest. "When command came and you refused to hand me over, I have been in that position before. Many times. Long ago and more recently. And every time, I have found that what happens next depends on the choice made in that moment. Most of the time, in the old times, the choice went the wrong way." He looked at Sorrel steadily. "You chose well. You did not have to. You chose to. Anyone would have," Sorrel said. "No," said Doran simply. "They would not. That is why it matters that you did." He did not say anything more about it. He looked around the room of handprints one last time. His expression was not sad. It was the expression of something completed, a long task reaching its end, a door closing gently on a room that had been well kept. They walked back through the city in easy silence, through the corridor of family patterns on the ceiling, past the children's drawings, through the wide civic hall, up through the access shaft and out onto the surface of Orith 9, where the cold wind came low across the gray land, and the pale meridian sat waiting with its lights on. Doran went up the ramp first. Sorrel followed last, and before she went in, she turned and looked back at the planet, flat and gray and cold, and underneath it all, enormous with everything it held. The ship lifted off. Through the common room viewport, Doran sat and watched the ground fall away. He watched the ruins shrink to a point, then disappear into the gray-brown surface. He watched until there was only sky and then only stars. His face was still, settled, whole. Sorrel sat across from him and watched him watch the stars, and she thought about the handprint in the stone. Already there, already his, left 400,000 years ago by hands that had known, somehow, that this moment would come. His eyes, she thought, looked like someone who had never truly left and had always known, with perfect patience, that one day the door would open.